Hey, what's up guys? Thanks for dropping by the channel. So in this video, I got a bit of a head-to-head comparison against what I consider probably two of the best 500-meter dive watches that you can get between the $3,000 to $4,000 price tier. So on the left-hand side, I got my Breitling SuperOcean. This is the 42mm Breitling with the white dial. And then on the right-hand side, I got my Sinn U50 SDR. It's a 41mm case and it's got the PVD coated and tegmented bezel. Now I'm just going to hold up both of these watches side by side here just to show you that I do think that there are a lot of similarities when it comes to some of the specifications and dive watch characteristics for both timepieces. But that being said, some of their design language and the versatility do differ depending on your use case. And if one pulls ahead of the other for one of those specific scenarios, I'm going to let you guys know during the course of this high-level overview. And then at the end of the video, I'll just give you my overall conclusions and what I think you might want to go for if you can only choose between one of both of these excellent divers. So let's just start off with the basic case dimensions and overall case profile for both watches. And I'll start with the Breitling. So as I mentioned, you do have a 42mm case diameter. If I flip this watch to the side, lug to lug between my thumbs is an even 50mm. And that is truly 50 because you can see the end links for the bracelet just pull down here. So the end links don't actually increase the lug to lug dimensions at all. And then your case thickness for this guy is 13.5mm. And a few millimeters of that is this beautiful domed sapphire crystal that has anti-reflective treatment on both the top and underside. And you can see the beautiful viewing angles that this dome crystal affords you on the dial. And before moving on to the Sinn, I'll just mention that the overall case shape here, you have these lugs that just turn down and help just conform to your wrist. You also have some crown guards for a 3 o'clock crown, which is nicely knurled, and it's got the B Breitling logo here. And the case finishing, you can see high polish on the sides of the case, very nice differential brushing on the hoods of the lugs and on the bracelet as well. And then you got some more high polish on the bezel as well, and kind of like on the center flange before you get to the actual dial. And then we got the Sinn U50, which is more of a compact version to the U1, which was originally a 44mm diver with 1,000 meters of water resistance. This one is 41mm, packing that 500-meter depth rating. And then if I flip to the side, you can see it's a little more compact than the Breitling. Lug to lug between my thumbs is 47, although I do have to mention that the end links here do just jut past the lugs a little. So the lug to lug, if you measure including the end links, is closer to 50mm like the Breitling. But where the Sinn U50 does pull ahead is keeping this watch a little bit thinner, coming in at 11.2mm thick, which is amazing, and it has a perfectly flat sapphire crystal, also with that double AR coating. So there's anti-reflective treatment on the top side and underside, and you can just see viewing angles, and overall legibility for this watch is extremely high, especially with a contrast, the black dial with white markings and then some red accents along the dial and bezel make this watch very easy to view from pretty much any angle. Now in terms of the case form, it's more of a flat case. The lugs are pretty much straight out. I like the fact that they do have drilled lug holes here, so you can quickly swap this out for straps. Both of these watches are actually strap monsters. They both have a universal 20mm lug opening if you do want to accessorize with a rubber strap, leather straps, or NATOs. And in terms of finishing, the Sinn U50 is pretty much a no-nonsense bead blasted finish throughout. You don't even really see any polish accents, not even on the underside for the case back or on the side flanks of the bracelet links. And you can see that the crown for the Sinn U50 is off-centered, nicely sized, but it's near the 4 o'clock position. No crown guards, but you can see that the belly of the case and when it meets the lugs kind of protect the crown from being bumped accidentally as well. So I do like that some common characteristics between both divers is they kept the overall legibility very good. Both have that double treated AR sapphire crystal. The dials and handset do have some nice contrasting counterparts. The luminescence on both watches is excellent. And I'll throw up a low light shot now, just showing both head to head. Both use Swiss Superluminova. And if I had to give the edge to one, it's really hard to say. I think that the Breitling is a little more potent with its lume. But in terms of longevity, both do stand out. With orientation, the Breitling does have those oversized Arabic numerals, so it's easy to get orientation even in low light situations. Whereas the Sinn is definitely more symmetrical with its markers. And in terms of the bezel lume pip, I definitely prefer the Sinn U50, which has a much longer truncated triangle. Alright, so another common feature to most dive watches is the dive time bezel. And let's go back and quickly talk about the Breitling, which has an amazing bezel action. It has a captive bezel because it has small screws fixed in at different intervals to keep the bezel in place so it won't pop off due to friction. You can see it's a nice coin edge style bezel, 120 click unidirectional, and I want to mention that the bezel insert appears to be steel, but then they actually filled it in with some form of DLC coating. So the DLC is inlaid into the steel bezel insert, and the action on this Breitling SuperOcean is phenomenal. Very, very satisfying detents, and each click is extremely reassuring, and there's actually no backplay to this bezel whatsoever. Now moving on to the Sinn U50's bezel. As I mentioned, this is a PVD coated tegamented bezel. So tegamenting is Sinn's proprietary process for hardening the bezel insert, so it's 5 times more scratch resistant than traditional stainless steel. The knarling on it isn't as deep. It's still kind of a coin edge style bezel. This one is 60 clicks, unidirectional, and it's a little more audible than the Breitling. Each click, I think, it just feels a little bit more springy when you go into each individual detent. And there's very little backplay as well. If I had to pick one bezel over the other, I'm going to give the edge slightly to Breitling. I just feel like the action is a little more refined and rigid. It's a little easier to grip, but I also like the fact that Sinn also went with a captive bezel design as well. So similar to Breitling, you can see that there's actual small screws at different anchoring points on the bezel. So again, if you want to dismantle the bezel, you're going to have to actually remove the screws before taking it off. So let's talk about the automatic movements inside each timepiece. Again, starting with Breitling. Breitling is utilizing their B17 caliber inside this watch, which the base movement for this is really the ETA 2824-2, which is a workhorse Swiss movement. It has 25 joules, about a 38 to 40 hour power reserve. It's got a 28,800 vibrations per hour beat rate. It's hacking and hand winding as well. And this is a chronometer grade movement. So it is adjusted in 5 positions to keep the COSC deviation standard within -4 to +6 seconds per day. Now, surprisingly though, this is near the top of that tolerance. Anecdotally, I do get about +6 seconds per day when wearing this timepiece. Now, with respect to the automatic movement inside the Sinn U50, they went with the Sellita SW300. So for those of you who don't know, Sellita are pretty much clones of ETA movements. They're just more available. So Sinn started to transition from ETA-based automatic movements to Sellitas. This one is a top grade Sellita SW300, which has a 26 joules. The power reserve is slightly increased to about 42 hours, I believe, on the SW300 over the ETA 2824. And then it's hacking hand wind as well. And now because Sinn is a German company, they don't go through chronometer certification, but they do regulate these watches extremely well. And I was surprised that anecdotally this watch only gets about plus 2 seconds per day, and it does tend to keep better time than the Breitling SuperOcean. And lastly, I gotta mention that the SW300 is a very thin movement. It comes in at 3.6 millimeters in total thickness, and that does help keep the profile of the Sinn U50 a little lower. So if I did have to give a slight edge based on purely the automatic movement, I'm going to go with the Sinn U50 over the Breitling SuperOcean. So let's quickly transition and talk about the bracelet and clasp on both watches, because these are some standout features for both timepieces. So let's start again with the Breitling. They have a 3-link bracelet with stagger cut alignments through the center links. And then if you look at the side profile, you can see that there's actually 2 screws holding each individual link in place, and they're slot-sided screws. And if you do want to size the links for this guy, you're going to have to remove both screws from the side shoulder link here, and then piece it back together. But I really love the comfort of this bracelet, and the articulation on this bracelet is crazy. You can just fold everything together, and it does fold right over flat on the case back here. And the tolerances are quite good. There's not that much flex to it. Now, when you get to the clasp, it's quite thin. There's 4 levels of micro adjustment, so 4 different anchoring points you can use to fine-tune the adjustment. It does have the Breitling logo. You got a fold-over security here, and it's just a friction fit closure. But if you open it up, you can see nice polished swing arms. It does say Breitling on the underside here. Now, there is no diver's extension on this guy whatsoever. Let me just throw this on wrist so you can see how it wears. So here's a quick shot of how the Breitling SuperOcean looks on my 19 centimeter circumference wrist. And that includes this very low profile clasp that helps keep the overall comfort of the bracelet in play. And again, if you look at the case shape here, I like how the lugs drape down. You can see there's really no gaps when I'm wearing this watch on my wrist. And all right, so let's quickly talk about the bracelet on the Sinn U50, which is also a 3-link style bracelet. It's an H-link bracelet, similar to the Breitling. It does taper a little, so it's 20 millimeters at the head of the watch, tapers down to about 18 millimeters at the clasp. The clasp is very similar in terms of it's just got that fold over and friction fit security. Now, unlike the Breitling, there is a pull-out diver's extension, so it's all or nothing increase of about 5 or 6 millimeters here. There's traditionally only 3 micro adjustments, but the previous owner of this timepiece drilled in a 4th one for some reason. I do find that the overall clasp is a little bit thicker and longer than the Breitling is, but sizing the H-link system on the Sinn is much easier. They use double-sided hex screws, and you get the tools, the hex tools that will fit in to quickly size each individual link. And again, the tolerances on this bracelet are about the same as on the Breitling. So here's a quick wrist shot of how the Sinn U50 wears on my 19 centimeter circumference wrist. You can see that the clasp is a little bit longer. It sticks out a little bit more, but the articulation and tolerances are very similar compared to the Breitling. Although if I did have to pick one bracelet over the other, I will go with the Breitling on this one, getting the slight edge, because I do find that the clasp is more comfortable, and I like the overall finishing and engineering of the angle cut bracelet system that Breitling uses. All right, so right before I wrap up, let's just talk about pricing for both guys. So the Breitling SuperOcean here on my left has an MSRP of about 4,500 Canadian dollars. And then that's compared to the Sinn U50. The SDR here comes in with a price tag of closer to 3,300 Canadian dollars. Now, if you go what the actual market is telling you, you can typically get a bit of a discount on the Breitling SuperOcean. And meanwhile, the prices for Sinn watches has been steadily climbing over the past year. And it's actually kind of hard to get a discount on the U50 because it's not widely available at this time. Now, if you could only pick one, what use case would you go with for when picking the Breitling SuperOcean? Well, for me, I think that the overall finishing and fitment of this watch is more typical of your daily driver. I think it's a little bit more versatile because it does have some differential finishes on it. You do get more brand equity with Breitling. I think people recognize the brand a little bit more. So I would just say if you're only going to pick like one dive watch to wear as a daily driver, and you can kind of dress it up and have it be a little bit more versatile, then you might want to go with the Breitling SuperOcean. But on the other hand, in what situations would you really want to pick the Sinn U50? Well, I definitely think that the Sinn U50 is a little bit more understated, a little bit more austere. The dial symmetry is a little bit better because it doesn't have oversized air brake markings. And it really just is more of a no-nonsense tool dive watch. If you're looking for a watch that can stand up to a beating, it's a little more understated, but it's going to perform extremely well, then you might want to go with the Sinn U50. I do think it is tougher. It's got the tegimented bezel. The movement, I do think, gets a slight edge in terms of accuracy. And Sinn does have some of their proprietary technologies with respect to temperature and pressure resistance when regulating these movements. And lastly, if you do have a smaller wrist size, definitely this one is a little bit more compact on the lug to lug, but more specifically on the overall case thickness. I can't get over how thin this case is, given that you get 500 meters of water resistance on this watch. But guys, at the end of the day, I don't think you can go wrong with either dive watch. But as always, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments of this video. Which watch would you prefer and why? Now, if you do like this content, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. It does help me out quite a bit. And I hope you guys can stay safe during this time. And as always, I'll catch you in the next video.